My name is Ted Burns, and I'm Senior Director of Political Affairs and RADPAC for the American College of Radiology Association, and I want to welcome you to our RADVOCACY podcast hosted by RADPAC. Our goal with the podcast is to give you a behind-the-scenes look into the various advocacy efforts of the college, our members, and insights from political influencers here in Washington, D.C. Hello, this is Ted Burns, back with the RADVOCACY podcast, and today we are super excited and honored to have as our guest Dr. Lauren Nicola. Dr. Nicola, welcome.
Thanks, Ted. Happy to be here.
Now, I really wish we don't have time in the podcast to go through all the hoops and hurdles it took for this to happen today, but I think that could probably be its own podcast. Maybe we'll get into that later or down the road, but I do appreciate your patience and your persistence to make this happen. I think it's going to be a really good episode for us because typically when we're doing these RADVOCACY podcasts, I like to kind of feel like I'm a relatively subject matter expert on advocacy, kind of what I've been doing my entire career. But when I've had Dr. Greg Nicola and when I've had now you, and we do anything economics related, it is like such foreign territory for me. I am the furthest thing from a subject matter expert on this. So my questions are pretty vanilla because I don't want to embarrass myself with asking a question that doesn't make any sense. But I think you're going to have a ton of information to share with our audience, and I think it's going to be stuff that will really resonate with them. So before we even get into all that, can you just kind of walk us through your training, med school, residency, fellowship training, and then where you're practicing now?
Sure. So I did medical school at Duke University, and then I came to Wake Forest in Winston-Salem, North Carolina for residency and stayed there for fellowship. I spent a couple years on faculty at Wake in the breast and peds imaging departments, and then I moved to private practice in my current group, which is Triad Radiology Associates, based in Winston-Salem. I've been here since 2015, so about 10 years now.
Okay. And are you originally from North Carolina?
Yes, I grew up in a small town in North Carolina called Reedsville. It was a little tobacco town, about 14,000 people, maybe a stoplight or two. My parents owned a restaurant there, so grew up in a very small town, North Carolina. It's one of those places you really want to get out of as much as you possibly can until you grow up, and then you realize it wasn't so bad of a place to grow up.
I think there's a lot of country songs along those lines.
They probably name Reedsville by name, actually.
The reason why we wanted to have you on as our guest and really try to time it up as best we could, what just recently happened with the proposed rule that comes out every July, your role on the Commission on Economics. And so as a member on that commission, can you kind of talk first briefly about the types of work that commission does? And then as I was just doing a little bit of research before, and I mean, I've been with the college almost 22 years and I should know this, but I didn't really know it in the level of depth until today. All the different committees that fall within that commission and all the different work that's being done by all these volunteer leaders, which is really amazing. Yeah. If there's a particular maybe committee within that commission that you're working with the most or that you enjoy the most or that you contribute with the most, if you can kind of get into that background and experience with the college.
Sure. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. The Economics Commission is an incredibly diverse commission. We handle anything that touches health policy or reimbursement across the profession of radiology and radiation oncology, nuclear medicine. That's everything from Medicare payment policy to commercial payer policy, policies on screening reimbursement, how those policies are implemented in the real world. We have a lot of interactions with practices and across the country and how they are maneuvering their payment policy. Under Medicare, we deal with code creation, we deal with code valuation and the CPT and the RUC systems, and again, how those payment policies are implemented. Within the Economics Commission, there's committees that look at the reimbursement from each specialty side. So there's a neuroeconomics committee, there's a peds economics committee, all the subspecialties. So it really is anything that touches policy or reimbursement. The Economics Commission is overseeing, and our goal really is to make sure that radiologists are paid fairly, that we're reimbursed fairly in a way that protects our profession so that we can keep providing the high quality care that we do for our patients.
Now, I would think, and I kind of feel like I may have asked Dr. Nicola this as well, Dr. Greg Nicola this, but I know it's like intimidating for me, and I've been with the college for 20 years. Now, we work a lot in government relations department with economics department. It all falls underneath Cindy Moran's kind of portfolio, if you will. but it's pretty intimidating. Like if you don't really know going in, all the acronyms, the
Hmm.
alphabet soup
Hmm.
that's involved, and kind of all the nuance of payment, I would think it would almost discourage or be a deterrent for people who are like really busy. They kind of
Hmm.
want to help in the college or help in the profession, but they don't really know how. But then they're like, okay, Ted just wants me to write a check for RADPAC. That's easy. I can write a check. But to figure out all this nuance
Yeah.
of all these different details and all the research and reading, how did you get there? What
Hmm.
interested you to get into it? And then like what would you recommend to someone as who may be interested in this and maybe feels like, oh, this is a lot, I don't know if I can
Hmm.
do it? And you say, look, I did it, you can do it. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of kind of doing X, Y, and Z to get to
Yeah.
that point. What would you say on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be clear, we definitely need the people that just write the checks to Ted. So that's a really important role too. So don't
Thank
don't,
you,
don't
great
discount
plug,
don't
appreciate that.
discount those. It is intimidating. These, the for example, the physician fee schedule rule that proposed, it's thousands of pages of regulation. So it can be really really
Right.
daunting at first. But I think what drove me and what drives a lot of the economics volunteers is just the practical need to understand this. So a lot of us are practice leaders. A lot of us are in positions in our practices where we really kind of have to know what's going on and able to make educated decisions, informed decisions for our practices. So the ACR is actually a phenomenal partner to practices and giving us tools to be able to not only understand that, but to be able to advocate for ways that we can actually change that. So if that's your motivation and your passion, and that's pretty much how I got involved, how a lot of people I know got involved, is that there was a need in our practice to understand. For me, it was when MACRA legislation dropped in 2015. Nobody in my practice really had even heard of it or knew anything about it. So someone had to figure that out, and I was interested enough in it to do it. So I played a really indispensable role for my group by doing that, and then that led into more involvement with the RUC and other parts of the reimbursement chain. But for me, tying that practical implication of the knowledge, you're not just reading regulation to read it, write a book report on it or something. You're reading it because you can apply it to what we do every day. And even more importantly, apply it to how we can make things better and how we can change things for the better for the practice and for the profession.
And I would assume, like a lot of other things, that mentorship probably plays a pretty big role in that.
Hmm.
Finding someone who
Hmm.
maybe has been in that commission or a particular committee for a while, you kind of
Hmm.
know them through maybe volunteering at the chapter level at
Hmm.
the ACR or national level at the ACR, and then they say, "Hey, how do I get involved? Kind of walk me through what this means. Walk me
Yeah.
through how you guys do that." I assume that's a part of it as well.
Yeah, it's a big part of it, and because we're such a big commission, we have such an important role. We try to do a really good job of succession planning and making sure that we have a really deep bench of people that are interested and involved. We have a great team, and you'd think we'd be all really dull, boring geeks because we like to read thousands of pages of regulation, right? But we're actually pretty interesting, fun people. So I personally think we have a very collegial, entertaining team. So that's a draw for one. That's my plug for coming to volunteer with the Economics Commission. But it's really it's an amazing support. There's not a day that goes by that we don't get an email or a text from someone else on the team that's like, hey, what do you think about this? Or I saw this article, or this came out from this legislation, or this is what my practice is dealing with. So it's this really incredible network of volunteers within the college that are all trying to work on the same problems. To me, that's really appealing. And I think that's for someone who's just new and getting started, it really plugs them into this network of people that are there to answer their questions, that are, want to hear their story, because, it's really helpful for us to know what's going on in Wisconsin and, Nevada and California and all around the country. So we value those interactions, and I think it works both ways, that it's a good way to learn for people that are trying to get involved.
And it's pretty cool too, right? Because you can kind of maybe go into it a little bit self-interested at first, like, hey, I
Mhm.
know this. If I can get involved, I
For
understand this
sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
It's going to impact me directly how I
Hmm.
get paid. But now, even a little bit more broader, my practice, like you said, now even more, broadly, the entire space of radiology and how I can really be involved, especially when there's so many potential changes coming
Hmm.
down the pike. And this is a pretty critical time right now to have a lot of people to be able to have kind of their voice heard to make sure that we are, or you all are, compensated appropriately. So I don't know my actual intention with this question. I'll leave it open to your
Great.
discretion. How about that? So nice little preface there. So I have, what are the kind of the top three challenges that you see facing radiology? And I understand the timing may be such that you may look at it only through like proposed rule lens. So you
Hmm.
can look at it from the proposed rule type of lens, or you could look at it just like more broadly,
Hmm.
just, hey, I'm a radiologist, this is what I'm seeing on the ground. Or you could do it both. I mean, however you want to do it, approach it how you want. But I think this is, I'm curious to see what you say because, we hear a lot of stuff kind of anecdotally.
Hmm.
And so it's always good for us to kind of continue to hear that type of feedback because when I'm up on the hill and when my colleagues are up on the hill, it's important that we are accurately representing the things that you guys are facing that are really big challenges or really big concerns.
Yeah. So top three challenges facing radiology for me would be workforce, workforce, and workforce. I think one, two, one, two, and three. I'll stick with those,
Yeah.
but I think from different lenses. The first one being, I think burnout is a real problem, and I think that word's a little overused sometimes and gets cliche. But I mean, you can look at any practice in the country, and you can see the radiologists they're tired, they're overworked, they're stressed. The lists are really, really long. We're asked to do, sometimes two, three times the same amount of work that we used to do for the same amount of money and the same amount of time. And there just aren't that many hours in the day. And the job becomes really stressful. And part of our job at the ACR and as advocates is to educate, the other, the policymakers, other specialties, everything about that, because I think a lot of people are like, well, radiology, just sit in a chair and read scans. Like, that's not stressful. How is that stressful? We'll try reading,
Right.
faster and fast. It's like being on this
Right.
treadmill that they're constantly calling. You're not reading them fast enough. The volumes have exploded. You don't have enough people. You're asking people in your practice to give up vacation. You're, desperately trying to hire in a crazy market. It's really stressful. And, that turns radiologists who have time to really do their best clinical work and who have time to dedicate to volunteer and practice building and all the things that they used to find joy of outside of their clinical job into just literally fighting for survival. And I think that changes people, it changes practices, and it changes profession. So I think that's a big reason why workforce is a challenge. The next one is just, the market is crazy for radiologists. There aren't enough out there, and practices are having to compete in ways that we're seeing disrupt the market. And in some ways it's good, right? I mean, people should get paid what they're worth. We're seeing a huge increase in people that want like 1099 kind of telejobs and independent contractor type jobs,
Yeah.
which again,
Yeah.
there's a niche for that, and people should be able to have that flexibility. But if the market is such that it lures everyone or 90% of people into that type of economy, well, who's left to run practices? Who's left to be leaders? Who's left to do the non-reimbursed,
Right.
non-clinical work? Someone has to do it, unless we want an environment where we're all just hospital employees or we're all just, corporate employees. So if we want radiologists to have leadership roles and we want radiologist led practices, we have to take a close look at, the market forces that are driving that. I don't know the right answer to that, because it's really hard to tell people, well, don't take that job that's going to pay you $10 billion per RVU. You should stay here, make less, and, run your practice. Right? It's hard to give someone that advice, but when you look at it on a
Right.
whole profession level, it changes the landscape of what we're looking at. And then, of course, the reimbursement pressures. I think because they're doing more work, most radiology practices are doing fine. I don't hear a lot of radiologists complaining on an individual level about reimbursement cuts, but it really does become a problem when you're trying to recruit, you're trying to hire, and when you're trying to invest in innovation and technology. I mean, if my reimbursement per widget is going down and down and down, I'm less likely to go buy a snazzy new AI tool or a new MR scanner because I have to watch my margins. And so, we want to be careful that we don't stifle innovation in that way with declining workforces and combined with declining reimbursement.
This is something that it's interesting you used workforce as your answer all three times. When I go to fundraising events, and I go to a lot, as do my colleagues Josh and Ashley and Rebecca, we'll go to about 250, 300 fundraising events in a year. Congress is in session, 145 days a year, give or take. So it's a lot of cold eggs, rubber chicken, stuff like that. But when we're at these fundraising events, typically we're seated around a table with all the other specialty physician
Mhm.
lobbyists, if you will. And it is really interesting. Oh, I've, again, been doing this well over 20 years. It used to be reimbursement, reimbursement, reimbursement.
Right.
And I would say the last 2 to 3, 4 years, workforce, workforce, for workforce. Now, I think you had a really interesting approach because there are different levels
Hmm.
and variations of workforce. And then taking it to another level when you're looking at some of the other physician specialty organizations and what they're worried about with regard to workforce, right? I mean,
Hmm.
some are really worried about scope.
Yeah.
Some are really worried about, ER is worried about violence in the workplace. I mean, there's so
Hmm.
many different like levels that you don't
Hmm.
even realize. And I think these members of Congress are like, wait, you guys are concerned about working and having so much work? Like, shouldn't that be a
Feels
good
weird,
thing? And
right?
we're like, well, it kind of is, but it's an interesting kind of change of the thought process. And the other thing that I think also goes into what you were saying with the workforce stuff is also how do you kind of not just recruit for your practice, but recruiting people to get into radiology as
Yeah.
a whole. When reimbursement's kind of up in the air, and then they're kind of flirting with the idea in med school of which specialty you get into, or if they're even flirting with the idea of just getting into med school in general, going
Hmm.
into medicine as a career,
Hmm.
they start asking people and they say, wow, everyone I talk to in radiology says it's high volume, it's high stress, it's, you know, work life balance is harder than it ever used to be. And they're hearing this. And then you worry about the deterrent there as well, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of a whole nother thing. And so
Yeah, I will say,
I think it's really good at the college that we're really,
I want to interrupt real quick because I mean, I do still think radiology is a phenomenal
oh,
career. I
please.
mean, it is a great profession. We do so much good work. It is incredibly satisfying in a million different ways. So it's not like it's miserable, but there are pressures on it that make it,
No, no.
make it difficult. I think still, I mean, other specialties have all the same problems, right? They're stressed out in different ways. So
Right.
I
Right.
don't know that necessarily makes radiology less desirable relative to other specialties. We do have a lot of flexibility in where we can read and when we can read and things like that that are advantages. I think your point about medicine at all becomes a good one because there's a lot of challenges with healthcare right now. And a lot of people, I know a lot of doctors who tell their kids, look, unless you love it more than anything else in the world, find something else to do with your life. So I think that's probably the bigger challenge is how do we keep
Yep.
talented, good, qualified, amazing people going into medicine in general?
I feel now you're making me feel kind of guilty because my daughter, and I tell this story with her all the time, she's a really smart kid. She's entering her sophomore year in college. And for a while, she has really bad food allergies. So for a while, she really wanted to be an allergist and like, hey, I'm going to help the kids who are just like me going through food allergies as a kid. And I'm like, well,
What
I
else
don't
do
want
you
to
like?
dissuade
What else?
you.
Right.
Right. But you can help people in other ways. And now she's like, I want to be a teacher because I can still help people. I'm like, well, okay, that's a whole separate issue. But
One of mine
but
said she
anyway,
wanted to be a professional soccer player, and I was like, "Okay, professional soccer player is great, but what's their backup? What's their backup?"
right, right. Okay, so let's kind of address the elephant in the room because we're talking about all these economic things, and obviously the proposed rule just came out.
Mhm.
We have to kind of talk about, or actually you have to talk about because I don't really understand it, and I know that you do. So if you're trying to figure out a way to kind of say, okay, here's some good from it,
Mhm.
and here's some concerns from it,
Mhm.
how would you go about maybe touch on two or three things from each side of that
Yeah,
based off what just came out in the proposed rule, knowing obviously the final rule comes out
sure.
what mid late
November,
October,
November-ish.
early
Yeah.
November. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the listeners that don't know, CMS releases a proposed rule late summer, usually end of July, mid July, and then they get stakeholder comments. So the ACR and other specialty societies, every stakeholder known to man in medicine will write comments during the public comment period. CMS reads those comments, responds to them, and then issues a final rule at the end of the year. So what we have now is kind of their thought process. It's what they're thinking, what they've laid out there to solicit comments on. And there were some fairly interesting policies proposed in the rule.
Hmm.
Think there were a couple of wins. There was kind of for the first time in a while a small increase to the conversion factor proposed. Legislatively we have a 2.5% increase to the conversion factor coming our way. The problem is they also proposed this efficiency adjustment for a lot of codes, which include basically the whole radiology code set. And they were pretty vague in what they defined as the efficiency that was being accounted for in this adjustment. And it basically was just like procedures and things that they thought maybe were overvalued based on their times in the RUC database and things that could potentially you do enough of that you get better and you get gain efficiencies from. They mentioned AI, helping at least in the future, and that it's proposed to be a 2.5% reduction in the inter-service times in almost all of our radiology codes. On a dollar amount, it's not all that big, but conceptually, I think that's a problem for a lot of us who would disagree that there have been major efficiency gains in radiology in the last 5 or 10 years. And my personal opinion is this is probably part of a bigger political play to continue to shift money from specialties care to primary care. So, and to me, that was kind of telegraphed in the fact that they weren't super clear on why they were doing this. It was like, well, here's another lever we can pull to potentially shift some money over. Now, our job as ACR advocates on the Economics Commission is to make arguments against that, explain why there are not efficiency gains, why our studies have more images, more series, are more complex, our patients are more complex than ever, that if anything, we've become less efficient because we have more to look at and more to do per patient than we used to, and obviously bring in the workforce arguments and why it's a bad idea to cut a specialty that's already really struggling. So we're working on empirical data to support those arguments and building those arguments out. Suggesting that AI has already given efficiencies to radiology is just nonsensical. I think there's been papers that show that. I think anecdotally, any radiologist would tell you that there's no AI out there right now that makes them significantly faster. And in most cases, it probably slows you down a little bit because you got to look at the output and make sure you agree with it, adjudicate the findings. And if it does disagree with you, it takes you, like a lot of sweat to make sure that you're going to be in good standing if you had to stand in front of a jury of your peers and argue with the computer. So those efficiencies, while maybe future worlds exist, I think certainly aren't grounds for putting in a payment cut now. So the efficiency adjustment cut was a big surprise for us. There's some redistribution of payment proposed, shifting practice expense dollars from hospital settings to outpatient settings. So in theory, that helps private practices because it moves dollars from facility settings to non-facility settings. The problem is they don't account for radiology practices that serve hospitals. And most, I dare say, private practice radiologists provide services in hospitals. So you're not protecting the private practice if you're not accounting for the ones that still have the infrastructure expenses of running an office, but provide services in the hospital. So I think I'll stop there. There's so much more I could say. Oh, the other thing I want to mention that's probably considered a win by most people is that they did propose to make permanent the remote supervision component of contrast supervision. So for the last few years, we've been able to provide supervision of contrast in imaging centers by remote coverage by a radiologist, and they've proposed to make that permanent. So I think that in some ways would alleviate some of the workforce stresses, particularly in rural settings and places that are hard to get on-site coverage for.
That was one that probably a couple months leading into the proposed rule, we got a lot of questions about.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was questions because people were kind of, hey, in the proposed rule, do you think this is going to be when they'll finally make it permanent, or if there was just a variety of other random reasons why it became kind of like a hot, cool question to ask when we would go and speak at chapter meetings or other different conferences. It's funny when you're here at the college long enough and you hear words and it makes you go into like a different time window where there's kind of some similarities, and then your PTSD kind of kicks in. And for me, when I hear efficiencies, I always think of like MPPR.
Yeah.
I don't know why, and it's probably not apples to oranges.
It's a similar concept.
It's probably like apples to elephant.
Yeah.
I don't know, but like I remember MPPR, and I remember hearing efficiencies, and I remember, oh, what a mess that was, that whole thing. Obviously, we had pretty good success dialing a lot of that back then, but when this came up again in a proposed rule, that was not ideal. So really quickly before we get into the lightning round and kind of wrap this up, because I want to be respectful of your time, you kind of touched upon it a little bit. The proposed rule comes out, you guys go through it, tons of pages, lots of text and email threads. Somehow I got on one of them. I don't even know how. And I was like, wow, there's a lot going on here with all the feedback and analysis, which was really educational and pretty cool to see all the different exchanges of ideas and kind of how people were kind of how do we strategically address this, and how do we, what types of data do we need, and how do we get that data and all this type of stuff. But if you can kind of quickly talk about that, maybe just your observations or your role, and once the proposed rule comes out, then you guys, then what? Like, how do you guys go about, like, okay, we've identified some stuff. We obviously want to make a comment, but that's a big process in and of itself. How do we do like our comment letter and submit that and all that?
Right. So there's usually about 6 weeks between the proposed rule and when the comment period ends. So there's somewhat of a tight timeline to get all that digested, and especially if you want to run any data analyses or do any really sophisticated work to do that. So it is always, it amazed me when I first started in this process because the rule usually gets released at like 4 p.m. or something in the afternoon, and then by like
Right.
4:45, I've got a summary in my email inbox from an ACR economic staff member, and they're amazing about digesting that really quickly and turning that around. And then the
Yeah.
expectation is that we just get to work on it right away, and we start by reading the parts that we know are going to be that we've been looking for, that we know are relevant, and then of course we got to pretty much skim through at least the whole thing and make sure there's no surprises in there, which sometimes they like to kind of embed in places you least expect it. So the staff really does a phenomenal job of combing through the entire rule. The
Yeah.
volunteers read it, set meetings, sometimes multiple meetings to go over the hot topics and the issues that have been identified. CMS will sometimes pose specific questions in the rule. So they will talk about a thing and then they will say, we want specific feedback on this, this, and this. So we'll make sure that we address those. And then the other piece is that, we don't work in a silo as the ACR, as you know, Ted. So we got alliances with other specialties. There's some kind of political
Yeah.
strategy making that we do. So before we submit our rule,
Yeah.
we want to make sure that we're in alignment with SIR, with nuclear medicine, with Astro, and even with especially outside of the House of Radiology that have been our allies on certain things. So our arguments generally are better received when they come from a coalition of specialties. So we work with the contacts that we have there, make sure that we're having a coordinated response. So all that goes on. Comment letter is drafted, it's reviewed, it's revised several times usually, and then we have sometimes we have some consultants look over the math or the data behind it, and then sometimes we'll even employ the HPI, the Health Policy Institute, to run a quick study for us. We asked for at least one thing to be looked at that we could use as data in our arguments this time around, and we'll compile all that in the comment letter and get it submitted to CMS. And then sometimes we even meet with them personally between the comment submission period and the final rule just to drive home any points that we think are really vital for them to hear in person.
And I think that's probably something people don't really realize is that our economic staff, which I agree they do a phenomenal job, Katie, Angela, and the whole team. I mean, they're constantly having official conversations, maybe unofficial off the record conversations, emails.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
constantly trying to get a way to make sure radiology is represented fairly from the regulatory side too.
Right, right,
And it's not just from the legislative side. We're doing that with congressional staff. They're doing pretty much the same types of thing with the regulatory staff. And I think you make a fantastic point. It's one that we really try to hammer home a lot, but I think it can't be emphasized enough. And that is, strength in numbers. If we can go to the Hill or we can go to a regulatory body and we can say, hey, this isn't only just what we think, this is what the entire House of Radiology is united behind. Oh, and by the way, there's no problems with other specialists, or all the other specialists agree with us
right,
too, or what. That just makes it so much more difficult for them to kind of be a pain about it.
right, right.
Whereas if it's just us fighting an issue by ourselves, it's easier to kind of dismiss us because we're just kind of on our own little island. And so, kind of that collaboration internally within the House of Medicine or within the House of Radiology, but then also more broadly with House of Medicine is so critical because oftentimes people. I assume they do this on the regulatory side. Certainly on the congressional side, congressional staff is constantly like, well, who's against it? Where's the rest
Right,
of the
right,
folks in medicine on this? And so if you can say, hey, we're all united, then they're like, okay, then, because that's less of a pain for them. They don't want
right.
to have to get in the middle of like a food fight, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word. And actually, that's a pretty good segue. So we're going to go into lightning round questions.
Okay, I'm ready.
And the first one is favorite food. Now, I did not know prior till the very beginning of this podcast that you had a family in the restaurant business. So I don't know if that skews your favorite food at all, one way or the other.
No,
But
probably
anyway,
not.
what's your favorite food?
My favorite food's ice cream. If we're going to count that as a food, does it have to be a nutritious food?
Okay.
Is that
Okay.
is
No,
that the answer?
it's
Okay.
yeah, it doesn't there's no judgment here.
Okay.
That's fine. What is your favorite ice cream if you're going to say ice cream?
Oh my gosh, I like things with chunks in it, so that
Love
has
it.
either, like, candy pieces or some kinda texture to it.
All right, so ice cream. Favorite place to travel?
Anywhere in the mountains. My favorite place that we've been is Patagonia. Torres del Paine is the most beautiful place on earth.
Wow, sounds great. Favorite hobby activity that does not include the work you do on the Commission on
Those are all
Economics?
my only hobbies, Ted. No. Spending time with my husband and 5 daughters, and playing tennis.
Okay. Okay, very good. Now I should have known this is kind of a cheat code because if I remember when we did this with Dr. Greg Nicola, I think he might have said ice cream was his favorite.
Oh,
I
really?
feel
Yeah,
like
we
he
we do
did.
both love ice cream, so it's
And I do feel like he also mentioned tennis, but I guess that makes
it
sense that
makes
you
sense,
guys
right?
have these similarities, right? Okay, this probably won't be the same. If it is, there's something going on. You guys are really connected. Favorite saying or quote. Now, this can be something that's like famous. This could be something that maybe you kind of just randomly created yourself. Famous saying or quote, something you catch yourself saying all the time, or maybe something like your kids have heard you say 1,000 times. They roll their eyes, like, "Oh, there she goes again."
Oh, let's see, how long do I have with this? Because I have probably three answers to this. My favorite
Okay,
non-me quote is, Mike Tyson said, "Everything goes according to plan until you get punched in the face," which, I think is
right,
so true, right? It's easy to have a plan
yeah,
until you get punched in the face. What my kids hear me say all the time is, "Suck it up, buttercup." So, you can take that as any kind
okay,
of judgment you want on my parenting skills. But
okay,
that's
that's
that.
fine,
And
that's
then,
fine,
a very quick funny story, which hopefully is appropriate here. When my youngest daughter was 3, at daycare, they had them write out what your mommy always says for Mother's Day. It was like all these things about your mother, but it was mommy always says, and they wrote
okay,
down her answer. And everybody else's was like, she loves me, all these nice things. And hers said, wipe
right.
front to back. So that's on the
Well, she was
wall.
paying attention.
It's,
That's
it's, it's a
good.
really important life message.
Well, look, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your patience and persistence with us to find a
We did
good
it.
date and trying to get us going. I think this was really good content for the people who listen to the podcast. And I want to thank you for your involvement, your expertise, and all that you do. It's a lot of work, and it's very much appreciated by us. So thank you.
Thank you, Ted. It's awesome being here with you.